Hello, David, and welcome to Friday, where somehow or other, it always seems to be a fire drill. How are you, David?
Well, the adrenaline is racing through my system, but it's good to be with you, Jason.
Now, David, I think today is going to be a subtly exciting moment for our viewers. I don't know if people have noticed yet, but you're looking remarkably high tech, David. How do you feel over there today? Something seems different.
Well, I've just got a new computer, which is throwing the demand that I change all my passwords, so I'm totally confused. But anyway, I'm fighting through, so what you see is what you get.
The good news is this new computer, it seems to have much better processing capabilities, probably has a graphics processing unit. The camera seems a lot better. Your video frame rate seems better. So it's an exciting evolution. You may want to tip the screen a little bit towards you so we don't see so much of the ceiling, because I think this is exciting for people. You know, when you started with Abelle Danger, David, it seemed like a lot of time was spent where people were just listening to you on the phone through a pretty boomy speakerphone type of thing. And one of the things I liked about when we began was that we were featuring you on video, which gave people an opportunity to see you. And I think that's always a nice addition. And now we've got yet another upgrade to your audio visual avatar, as it were.
Well, as long as it pulls some of my IQ with it, I have no problems.
Now, we're talking today. People are going to be maybe upset that they feel like we're harping on this too much, but this is not an attack. This is not a accusation of any kind. We're just sort of noticing that there's this nexus between Abelle Danger, A-B-L-E, Danger, and Abelle Danger, A-B-E-L, Danger. Before we talk about that nexus, do you want to give us just a little background maybe for some of our viewers who aren't familiar with either or both of those entities?
Sure. So Abelle Danger, spelled A-B-L-E Danger, was a data mining project created by General Henry Sheldon, something like that, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who evidently felt that there was some planning for an attack of some sort coming through his intelligence networks that was poorly understood. So he launched Abelle Danger to engage in data mining. And I think really that looks to me very much like traffic analysis of the kind described by Bill Binney in The Thin Thread. Anyway, he came up, or it allegedly came up, with a whole bunch of names and identities networked together from traffic analysis that would subsequently be claimed would have identified the hijackers and the terrorists in the 911 attack and possibly allowed them to thwart it. Now, the problem is, and I think for most people it's rather tricky, and it's tricky for me to understand, you could actually create a social network and plant in artificial reality identities into that network and create the impression that this was an attack coming from real people, you know, Mohammed Atta, etc., etc. But in fact, it's and it's a term that I'm still getting my head around, it's actually a sandbox. So it's an artificial entity that people are attracted into in the belief that they're actually finding or looking for real terrorists, when in fact they're virtual terrorists, if you see what I mean.
Well, let me ask you this, David. So are you suggesting that General Henry Hugh Shelton, I guess he was the director of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or something like that, that he had created an artificial reality sandbox to try to fake something about 9/11?
And this is absolutely fascinating. I think many of the people inside the sandbox believe legitimately they're doing the right thing, and that includes Abelle Danger, which is what I created for Field McConnell and my work subsequent to the 911 attack. But I come back to that. I think the art of putting together a sandbox is to get good people sniffing around in the sandbox in the belief that they're actually looking for something useful and real, and then watch them and monitor them. It's basically it's a counterintelligence tool, and see if they are in danger from the conspirators' point of view of breaking out of the sandbox and locating the real conspirators behind the 911 attack. So it's quite subtle, and I think actually I was suckered into the Abelle Danger sandbox. I thought of the name, but then in my work with Phil McConnell, which was probably over 12 years, I realized that the foundation of my research, which had identified his sister as a principal suspect in the 911 attack, giving her creation of the United States Justice Prisoner and Transportation System, it took me a long time, as you know, to recognize that Field, wittingly or unwittingly, willing or unwillingly, was actually operating in a sandbox that was designed to go nowhere. Over to you.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. And you know, I wanted, you raised a point that I wanted to address that just slipped out of my head. There's so many things that I'm trying to keep track of here. It's often difficult to remember. But for people, David, who might be tuning into us for the first time, you and I are doing a show every Friday on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. We're going to be addressing some of the technical issues, and we've got some scheduling stuff happening. So the Patreon show will actually happen a little bit later than normal today. We're going to continue talking here on YouTube for a while to flesh out these ideas that we're talking about. But we'll resume later at 3 p.m. Eastern on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. You've got a post right now up on Reverse CSI Storyboards Patreon page, David, that features some imagery that I think you wanted to talk about. Did you want to get into that?
Yes, if you could get up that image of the map of connections related to the Abelle Danger. That's the Abelle Danger.
Sorry, I just remembered something that I wanted to share with you, David. So you were telling us, and I don't mean to cut you off, but it came back to me. You were telling us that you came up with the name Abelle Danger, Abelle Danger, but you came up with this name as a result of hearing about this program from Hugh Shelton, Abelle Danger, intended to spot terrorists. So you have always told me that you thought of the name. And the other day when you and I were speaking, it occurred to me that, you know, I don't know how this illusion is done, but I think it's a pretty common tactic among sleight of hand illusionists, this concept of forcing a card on someone. You fan out the cards and ask your person who you're doing the magic trick to select a card, and somehow they're selecting a card that the magician wants them to select. So it caused me to wonder, at the time that you came up with the name Abelle Danger, was there perhaps someone who had suggested that to you, or in a similar fashion to a magician forcing a card on someone and having them leave the magic show thinking, I selected the 2 of clubs. How did the magician know that? Did someone force that Abelle Danger name on you, leaving you with the supposition that you had thought of it?
This is brilliant, Jason. I compliment you because I think exactly that. So I was left with thinking that I'd thought of the name. I think exactly that. It was forced on me. Let me give you the context of what I remember, and it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
So once I'd had that conversation with Phil McConnell on the 6th of December 2006. That followed a conversation I'd had on Coast to Coast with George Noory on September the 11th of 2006, where I laid out my analysis of the use of incendiaries to bring down the Twin Towers. And I have a background in explosives. I used incendiaries a little bit, and this is internal to the oil industry work that I was doing, not destroying buildings, but punching holes in casing to allow. So when I heard that Field had a sister called Christine Marcy in Washington, and he told me that all he knew was that she was a powerful bureaucrat, but he didn't know what she did. It's quite possible he did know what she did, because back in 1988, she had called him and said, how do I handle a mutiny on the plane? Apparently they'd bought a Boeing 727 for the Federal Marshal's prisoner transportation system. And Field had told her Well, you drone the plane so that if there is a mutiny by the prisoners, presumably they don't want to die, and I'm thinking of Con Air, you know, that film, then all you need to do is take over the plane electronically and fly it to a safe landing, and basically the prisoners can be, so to speak, neutralized. Anyway, so going back there, then I thought, well, if Field McConnell is the brother and Christine Marcy is the sister, with all of the assets and resources and networking necessary to execute a switch from a simulated exercise into a live fire attack on 911, why don't I call them Cain and Abel? And I think Field, he wrote a second book called Brother Cain and Sister Abel, because I said to him, do you want to kill your sister, or do you want your sister to kill you? He said, well, I'd rather be Brother Cain, and this would be Sister Abel. Now, this is fascinating because I think you've nailed it. And I'm just thinking of that artificial reality, three-dimensional stuff that you did, you know, the magic show in the Houdini store, etc., etc. And I don't know if I've got the word serendipity or something, but the fact that you have this extraordinary skill set in the world of illusion and Hollywood, and perhaps I have a good skill set in the world of analysis and deductive reasoning around the laws of physics, I think the greatest threat to this conspiracy is the fact that I jumped ship out of Abel Danger, which I now, looking back on, believe had become a social network or a sandbox to isolate the people capable of analyzing 911 from the reality of 911 and protect the conspirators. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I'm just showing everybody this virtual reality piece that you're talking about, David. This was Phantasma VR. This is a video that I created when I was incredibly disappointed with the quality, the low quality of virtual reality productions being shown at the Sundance Film Festival. So I came home from that festival and modified some of my 3D equipment to create a stereoscopic virtual reality camera system. And the following year, when I went to the Sundance Film Festival, I showed this piece to J.J. Abrams, the director of Star Trek and various Star Wars movies, and he said this was the best looking stereoscopic virtual reality piece he'd ever seen. But we're getting off topic here. So it's interesting, this Abel Danger, A-B-E-L, A-B-L-E, and now you've coined the new phrase of Abelle Danger, which is oddly interesting when we think about Bell Sheep Ministries and some of the ways in which the names have changed around. It's a definite social engineering operation in my book. We've seen the Abel Danger YouTube channel and its 60,000 plus subscribers migrate to some other channel name. So that's an interesting tactic. They can build up a 60,000 subscriber strong YouTube channel and then flip the script on everybody, almost like a sleight of hand trick, like my young friend and neighbor Toby here, who's now taller than me. This kid is like over 6 feet tall now. But it's like a little magic trick, David. They gather all of these subscribers based on information that you've put out and Field has put out, and now they've got totally information there. Do you feel baited and switched by that in any way?
Yeah, but I escaped, and thank God I did, because people like you and various other parties, after watching myself with Field McConnell, who, you know, underlying the fact is he opened the door in, I believe, that will help us ultimately bring this conspiracy down to its knees by putting me in contact with his sister. Now, let me say, on the 1st of May of 2007, I had written a pro se lawsuit for Field to file in the Dakota court, and he did. What I told him to do was file it so it's got a court register on it, and I'm sure that's a document that can be retrieved. It's actually, the text is up on the abledanger.org site. Basically I told him, don't serve it on anyone, but name all of the individuals that were sitting or squatting beside the social network that was created to distract public attention away from them. So there are a couple of names on that. Oh yeah, it's marvelous, right?
But wait, is that it? That was some lawsuit against the Pilots Association. I think this is it.
Well, it's whatever was filed on May the 1st of 2007.
Yeah, that one was 2011. That was the wrong one. I'll keep looking for it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Now, so what we did, I got about 100 names, but the most perhaps important name was Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister. There we are, draft preamble. If you click on that, you get it opening up, right? And so what I decided to do as a precaution, and some sixth sense must have told me the importance of that, was to get into the court a register of what I believe they were doing, not to serve it on anyone, because I also realized at that time they had constructed a crime scene of such complexity where there were different compartmentalized teams going into the crime scene, perfectly synchronized on a clock that I hadn't realized was the National Physical Laboratory clock in the custody of Serco in the United Kingdom, which in its modern form is accurate to 1 second in 186 billion years. So it's going to see you and me out pretty thoroughly, right? But what I hadn't realized is that there was a network that was able to deploy prisoners or illegals or specialized compartmentalized teams like environmental cleaners into a crime scene without the knowledge or understanding by that team of what the other teams were doing. So I had actually stumbled on the idea of setting up a sandbox where people of good faith would go in believing they'd pick up on one particular group. You and I have talked about a lot about that team outside the Pentagon, on the Pentagon lawn, picking up evidence and taking it away in small, brown paper bags. And I'm saying, well, that's a team that may not know that they've been actually sucked into an exercise, cleaning up the Pentagon lawn, but actually they're contributing or to concealing a murder for hire operation. So I think it's brilliant because what they've done, and let me just name the people behind it. Serco, right, in its work with the United Kingdom Cabinet Office at Hawkins in the United Kingdom, will borrow the government's communication network and then inject news and media plays to test the ability of the government spokesperson to handle an emergency. So Serco is in the business, and its predecessing organization was RCAGB 1929, of setting up, I believe, sandboxes into which people, perhaps believing they're part of an exercise or a legitimate crime scene investigation, are actually trapped, you call it magic sleight of hand, and they're forced into investigating something while being surveilled that goes nowhere, right? So this to me is a classic example. Those individuals in that scene, I believe they've been issued with FBI t-shirts, right, for that morning. I think they checked into the Pentagon City Sheraton Hotel, which is where the sandbox is set up, the night before, and they were told, we want you on the Pentagon lawn tomorrow morning at, let's say, 9:30, and there will be some whiz-bang stuff. Don't ask any questions. We're going to tell you what to do. You're going to pick up the... Now, what these people are doing, Jason, is they're removing evidence from a crime scene. Where's the yellow tape?
Not only that, David, the more we look at this image, the more the magic trick is revealed to me. So here we got this guy, right? And, you would think in general for this type of thing, you pick something up and you walk to wherever you're walking. Now, we've looked at other images of the Pentagon that indicate that the hole is very much further over here to the right side of this particular scene. And so this guy, who seems to be walking in a trajectory sort of from this pile of junk over here that's been sort of swept up against the wall, this looks very much like the C that would be painted on the fuselage of an American Airlines jet. And this piece in the dude's hand seems to have also a piece of a letter, perhaps an A. I find it weird that this piece is torn up like this. There's no flame marks on it. There's no smoke marks on it. That whole building is incredibly burned up and charred, like everything was incinerated. And I also don't understand how these parts of the plane would get picked up and jammed up over here. Like anyone collecting pieces of the plane, you think they would be so important in terms of evidence and dusting them for any chemical residue, etc. Why would they be placed over here in the corner? It's almost like a prop truck rolled up, dropped all this crap, and then this guy picked it up, walked from that pile straight over to here, nowhere near where the plane hit, with a piece in his hand. He's practically displaying it for the camera that's taking this photograph. Who the hell is taking this photograph? Everybody who is interested in what's going on is over here. This looks so staged to me, David. It's difficult to explain it.
This is a sandbox, right? And let me just track back to the modern sandbox development, where you entrap people into terrified silence, right, with the willing suspension of disbelief. I think that was a phrase from Somerset Maugham about when you go to the theater or watch a movie.
Yeah.
You don't go in there with a critical facility and you're looking for, a camera in the middle of Ben-Hur or something like that. And
right.
Mistakes are made, of course. But in a sense, I think we're looking at a camera in the middle of Ben-Hur here. This is supposed to be the greatest attack on, and actually involved the destruction of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, which links the commander-in-chief with the battle groups around the world involved or associated with the 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. This is a stage play. And I use the word play a lot because my analysis indicates that these people are breaking up the play into 8 components or 8 acts, and each component or each compartmentalized group that undertakes, for example, cleaning up the crime scene, which of course is spoliation, is not aware of what the other groups are doing.
Yeah.
And one of the other groups, for example, would be spinning this story into the media, right, that involves the Abelle danger, the ABLE danger, virtual reality or artificial realities that are shown in that schematic that was screenshotted from the computer taken from, is it Anthony Schaefer's Abelle danger component.
Now, I've got that screenshot, David, that I want to share with everybody, and it creates a good opportunity for me to remind everyone at 3 p.m. Eastern, we're going to begin our exclusive sponsor-only show on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Let's look, David, if we can, for that image right here on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. Is this the post where I'll find it? Did Serco Boeing?
Yes. And if you scroll down, right.
Mr. Blumenthal,
so
right
that's
there.
Andy Schaefer. That's the Serco bosses who are actually manipulating
This is Senator Blumenthal. That's not Schaefer.
Okay, sorry, but he's talking about the Senate inquiry into Abelle danger, right? And keep going. There. Okay. See that? Right. That's the Al Qaeda network. Snapshots of typical operational cells associated with Osama bin Laden, spelled EUSAMA. Now that, to me, Jason, is a social network.
Oh, of course.
Right? Or it's a schematic of a social network. Now, was that social network assembled as a sandbox to delude Americans into thinking that the attack of 9/11 was associated with the virtual identities on that sandbox? Or was it a legitimate result of a data mining which threw these people up because they were actually going to carry out the attack? I think this is a sandbox with an artificial structure and set of relationships which they hoped people, it having been destroyed or shut down because Abelle danger was shut down, basically you've got the ghost of a social network that is intended to entice people in to reason about Mohammed Atta, who never, in my opinion now, ever had any role or any activity associated with the attack of 9/11. Over to you.
So how would Tony Schaefer and his team of allegedly sophisticated intelligence operatives, how would they not know if this is a sandbox artificial reality? I mean, they're saying that their ABLE Schaefer danger, that was tracking terrorists, but you're saying you don't think so. You think it was an artificial message, a sandbox.
I think it was a sandbox that was created and then destroyed. The evidence was destroyed. Now,
so would that theory have Anthony Schaefer complicit with that? Is he aware of that, or is he in the sandbox?
I think he's in the sandbox, just like I was in the sandbox when I was working with Field McConnell, and I believe Field McConnell was in the sandbox. Now, how do you keep people, honorable, otherwise honorable people, into the sandbox such that they never reveal to the outside public, shit, I'm trapped in this sandbox, help me out, right? The public has a role to play here. Actually, the public has a vital role to play, because anyone trapped in the sandbox, and I'll explain how people can get trapped in context of that letter from Tom Thumb or email from Tom Thumb. How do people get trapped in the sandbox such that even if they know they're in the sandbox, they feel there's nothing they can do to get out of the sandbox without getting serious damage? And here I come back to the raid on Starnet headquarters in Vancouver that you and we visited Starnet, right? And it turns out that Starnet raid on the 20th of August, 1999, there was 100 law enforcement officers that took all the kit away. Starnet was accused of engaging in hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming, and I believe that's what I would call, or what they would call, Deadpool gaming, where you can bet on the time of death of a high-value target or the body count at a mass casualty event, right? And the raid had 100 law enforcement people, including, vitally important, without the knowledge, I believe, and consent of a lot of Canadians, 2 SWAT teams, Special Weapons and Tactics teams, from the United States, from United States Customs and the IRS. Now, there was the RCMP, and incidentally, I called the RCMP local detachment 2 days ago. And I said, I believe I've been sent an email.
Now, wait a minute, David, you're getting a bit ahead of yourself here. There's a lot we've got to explain for people to follow that. Right?
Right.
I mean, so before we go into that, though, because I think that's what we're going to be discussing when we get over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. And now we'll leave everybody here in the comments to accuse me of interrupting you, but I'm more directing the flow of the conversation because you and I have mapped out what we wanted to discuss. I want to take you back to this concept of able danger versus able danger and make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about with that before we get into the entrapment from social engineers. And some of them are with us in the chat right now. I'm doing my best to counteract their nonsense. But you know, a lot of people, David, are going to see some of their favorite social media and alternative news personalities in this photo, and I don't want them to feel that we are casting aspersions or making accusations of any kind. But I did want to talk about the nexus of ABEL danger and ABLE danger. And David, I think there might even be factors to this that you are not yet fully aware of. Now, I've got pictured here on the left Anthony Schaefer, the retired lieutenant colonel who was working on that Able Danger program, I guess underneath General Henry Shelton. I don't know that much about Shelton, and it's intriguing, this concept that it was a sandbox. Someone would have had to create the sandbox. It looks like Mr. Shelton left the Joint Chiefs of Staff very shortly after September 11th, 2001. So we'll explore this in more detail, but we've only got a few more minutes here, and I wanted to explain this image to people a bit more clearly. And David, for me, the nexus of ABLE and ABEL danger occurred at the John B. Wells, what was it called? Operation Classified. He had an event in Dallas, Texas in 2000, I guess it was it the beginning of 2019? I guess it was earlier this year. A lot of people came to that event. Field McConnell was there, Anthony Schaefer was there, Robin Gritz was there, I met the Moriartys there, Scott Bennett. There were a lot of people there. Kevin Shipp went there. He and I had spoken about that, maybe going to the thing. And it was one of these events where everybody gets together and a lot of weird stuff happened there, David. I met some of your former colleagues, Craig, what's his name, from Able Danger, and there was a remarkable 180-degree turn in Field McConnell's attitude towards me after that event, which I found very surprising. But I think it is worth mentioning to our viewers that, from my perspective, this was the first time that Field McConnell and his Able Danger crew were in the same physical location as Anthony Schaefer, and I guess the sort of theoretical or just sort of symbolic presence of his Able Danger crew were there. And it was at a John B. Wells event. Now, you said to me at the beginning of this thing that you had appeared on, what was the show called?
Coast to Coast.
Yeah. And who was the proprietor
Coast to Coast
of that?
on September the 11th, 2006 with George Norrie.
George Norrie, right. And see, I wasn't that familiar with that show, but hopefully our chat room is going to help us understand what happened. But I think George Norrie at some point left that show, and I do believe it was taken over by John B. Wells. What do you think of that?
Well, I think, yeah, John B. Wells, doesn't he do Caravan to Midnight? But yeah, I think you're right. I think, and let's back up. I'm not, and you aren't, I don't think, making accusations about any of these people, because I think if you get trapped in the sandbox, you can have the best intentions and the most honorable intentions in the world, because a really skillfully designed sandbox gets you in there in the belief and keeps you in there in the belief that you're making progress. So when I started working with Field McConnell, as far as I understood, he and I were both closing in on one of the people who had, I believe, motive, opportunity, and weapon and the resources to help or contribute to the staging of the 9/11 attack, and that's his sister, Christine Marcy. So, like I said, I think it's very important that our listeners understand. I believe I was trapped in a sandbox right up to the time I, so to speak, jumped ship and joined you, or joined working with you on an independent path. And that made the guys who are being paid to maintain the sandbox as mad as hell. Now, paid, or it could be rewarded in other ways, you know, including getting to look at pictures of abuse of a child, etc., but that's kind of by the by. The point is, I think the great majority of people inside the sandbox are operating there in the belief that they're actually doing some good and going somewhere. But if you look at, it's now, 19 years since 2001 happened. It's a clue-rich environment, right? That crime should have been solved 2 weeks after the actual attack happened, but we're still speculating about who might be behind it. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to say really what's going on. And again, I'm not accusing any of these guys of doing anything. I'm just taking note of the fact that you're telling me that you got connected with Field McConnell after going on this George Norrie Coast to Coast. I'm telling you that there was a major change in Field McConnell and Able Danger's attitude toward me after this conference. There was a litany of other weird things that happened there that I won't go into right now. And it's just interesting to note, because it seems like these are the same three guys that were, you know, at least peripherally involved with your introduction to Field McConnell and what would later become Able Danger. So that's an interesting thing to take note of. You know, David, the other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and I admit this is a bit non sequitur, but hey, whatever. You and I have spoken quite a bit about aviation, about aircraft, about CIA operations and clandestine operations and human trafficking and child trafficking, and we've spoken about Jeffrey Epstein. And I have posed some time ago this sort of vexing question as to why would Jeffrey Epstein, someone who is worth $500 million, why would he maintain a 50-year-old Boeing 727, the rarest, you know, lowest manufacturer run of any Boeing model aircraft? I've spoken now to multiple airline pilots, including Dan Hanley. I spoke to an aircraft broker, a guy who brokers the sale of military and civilian aircraft. Both of those individuals found it extremely odd that someone would maintain a 50-year-old aircraft. And I've been asking this pressing question for some time, and through this remarkable crowdsource process, David, it was revealed to me that the Boeing 727 has a very unique feature, has nothing to do with the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, and there are people who have told me that that type of remote control autopilot could be retrofit to a plane, but something that you could not easily retrofit to a plane without redesigning the whole thing and having a different plane is this rear door on the Boeing 727 that can be opened in flight. And it allows you to, among other things, you could drop stuff out the back of the Boeing 727 and nobody would know. You could slow down to just above the stall speed and open up this little door. It was originally intended to allow people to enter and exit the aircraft at a time when airports didn't all have those little portable jetways that we've all become so accustomed to. So this little door, and also its location relative to the jets and the jet wash, allow you to do halo drops, high altitude, low opening parachute drops. You could do drug drops. You could drop food into a remote location. You could drop a dead body out of there. You could drop a living body out of there, and it would be dead by the time it hit the ground or landed in the ocean or whatever. So I find it interesting that Jeffrey Epstein operated a Boeing 727 50 years after its manufacture. The 727 has a really complex S-ducted third engine, which makes it undesirable from a maintenance standpoint. But if you want to drop stuff out the back of it, it's the only game in town other than a bomber. What do you think of that?
Well, you could drop a hit team, right?
Exactly.
You could drop a hit team recruited through the jail system that was effectively run by Christine Marcy, maybe in 1984 onwards, which just does the snuff component of a hit. They land close to the site, the crime scene, the high-value target. They go in, and then they're brought out in a different route. And that would be a classic example of this synchronized, compartmentalized 8-act plays that are staged such that the public is left sucking air, if that's the right term, trying to work out what happened. You've got an active sandbox where people are milling around, in many cases believing that they're doing the right thing and exposing the crime, but in fact they're a controlled entity by the people who are supervising or running surveillance on the team. Now, I just want to point out or remind the audience that the preferred supplier of command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance technology for Boeing is the British company Serco. And Serco has been given, this is staggering to me because I think Serco is an operation that should be wound down immediately from the point of view of the survival of the Republic. Serco in 2000 was given the contract to operate the National Crime Squad's information technology network, where all the data needed to solve the crime is now in the custody of the people who are the principal organization behind the perpetrators of the crime. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time here, David. We're going to be heading over to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. That's going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern, and people will be able to join us there. I also want to remind our viewers, David, you've been speaking about Christine Marcy for, probably almost 12 years. It's interesting that the Joint Prisoner and Alien Transportation System also operates a Boeing 727. So again, this is an aircraft that really doesn't make a lot of sense to operate. It's got these low bypass ratio engines, and it is pretty inefficient by today's standards. It's also very old, so it's going to require a lot of maintenance. And as the least produced Boeing aircraft ever, it seems like there'd be less Mechanics who would be familiar with it, something like a 737, which remains in production today, you're going to have an easier time getting parts. So it just causes me to wonder who would want to operate this Boeing 727 and why. And when we discover that they've got this capability to drop down, low enough so that the plane can be depressurized as it would before you land. I mean, you could fly right over the ocean and drop a dead body in. You could fly high enough to avoid being detected and drop a parachute team, a halo team. There's a lot of things you could do with it. Very specialized piece of equipment. David, we're going to wrap it up for now and resume in about an hour and 20 minutes. Anything you want to add before we go?
Yeah, just that very interesting about dropping a body. People might want to look at a wonderful film called The Man Who Never Was, where the British took a body where the gentleman had died of pneumonia, which is very akin to being drowned, put him in a uniform, put some papers on him, and dropped him off a submarine off the coast of Portugal, where he washed ashore. And the Germans picked this guy up, looked at the documents, which had been very carefully forged, and moved 3 divisions from Sicily to Greece. 3 divisions is 30,000 men. So it saved a lot of life. So if anyone tells me the British are not capable of deception, I've got a property in the Everglades to sell them,
right, swampland
like that. Yeah.
Well, on the topic of deception, David, there was even mention, I think it was that article or another article I was looking at about the 727, that the stairs could easily be modified to be a slide, and you could put bombs in there and basically have what they called a poor man's bomber. But the notion that something could fly as high and fast as a commercial aircraft and drop bombs, you can buy a Boeing 727 for like $1 million or maybe less, I don't know. But that's pretty wild from the standpoint of someone trying to do some kind of clandestine operation. One of these articles even went on to say that guided munitions could be dropped out of that thing. So that makes it a pretty effective war machine if you think about it. And we'll be talking more about that when we get over to Patreon. I almost forgot to mention David's really beautifully designed free website. That's reversecciscripts.com. People can go there. David maintains a playlist of the YouTube videos that we've done together, so you can catch up on all of these stories. Oh, I'm so sorry, David. I've got to update the playlist here. But lots of interesting conversations that David and I have had, and people can check out Reverse CSI Scripts. You can also follow David on Twitter. He is there at CSI Hawkins, and I hope that people will follow David and his daily posts and sponsor David on Patreon. We got to help him pay for that new computer, and he is looking very sharp and high resolution with a smooth frame rate. So David, I'll see you in just an hour and 20 minutes on Patreon. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jason. Looking forward to the next part.
Very good. Thanks for watching, everybody.